What's up, guys? Four-wheeler doctor back again. Funny t-shirt for the day. Hope you can read that. Pretty much explains me. Alright, now today we're going to be putting back together this 500 Foreman. It's actually a Rubicon, but still the same as the straight axle Foreman 500s. This is a 2016 model. It had a little bit of play in the rod, was smoking. I can't remember. I think I'm gonna put a cam chain in it. I can't remember if I'm gonna do that or not. But tonight we're gonna start out with pressing this. Actually, that's the old crank. There's the new crank in here. Pressing this new crank in. Give you the part number on it. Sure if you can read that or not, but 13000 HR3A40. Little crankshaft. Big thing here, press this thing in, is to line the tick marks up. Got a little tick mark there on that balancer shaft, and I'll show you on this old crank, but the tick mark for it is right here. So you line those two up as you press them together. Make sure your teeth mesh up like they're supposed to, and that keeps your motor in balance. Let me get this thing rigged up in the press. I'll cut the camera back off. Alright guys, I got this thing rigged up in the press. Got a socket on the end of the crankshaft. You definitely don't want to mess up the end of that crank, because the bearing goes in there. It has a pretty tight tolerance. I know this ain't the best way to do it, but I usually just stick a socket. In this case, it's a 13mm. It fits very tight inside these two halves here. As you press this thing in, it keeps this from pushing together. You also want to make sure that your rod doesn't get hung up, because see, it'll actually swing over this way and you can press against the rod. So make sure it's in the hole for the cylinder. And then the very last thing to check is the tick mark that we talked about earlier. And I'm gonna have to get a flashlight, but the counter shaft has to line up with that with the crank. Let me grab a flashlight so you can see what I'm talking about.
See, like mine.
Okay guys, so the little tick mark, well, dang, flashlight's about too bright. You can see the tick mark right there at the edge of the crank. You spin it around until it lines up with that tick mark on the crankshaft. I'm gonna have to do this. There's the tick mark on the crankshaft and the tick mark on the balancer shaft. About the easiest thing to do in this case is to pick up on your balancer shaft when it gets into position, and that will kind of let the teeth mesh up on it, and then hold up on that as you press it down. Can't even see the tick marks. Hold on, let me grab my camera stand and I'll see if I can show you this a little bit better. Alright guys, I'm gonna kind of halfway try to show this these notches being lined up. Let me get my press rig back up here. Let off the pressure and the socket fell out. Alright, so I've got the press back in there ready to go down. And you can look at your little notches there. Like what you eat, about the easiest thing to do here. God, I need a better flashlight. Alright, about the easiest thing to do here is to lift up on that counter shaft. Rotate this around. They're actually very close to being lined up right there. But if you lift up on that counterbalancing shaft, it will let the teeth mesh up, and then you can start pressing the thing down. Didn't have my press ready. You can start pressing the thing down. Until it bottoms out. That's it. Alright, let the pressure off. Get your socket out of there. Pull this thing out of here. Set it over here on the bench and see if we were successful at lining the notches up. So now run this thing back just a little bit, and as you can see right there, the notches line up. The odd thing about this, first time I ever did this, I thought it was kind of weird that this is not at the 12 o'clock position. It just seems odd that you rotate it off at a, I don't know, maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock position at the crankshaft to line that notch up. But another way to check to make sure it's lined up is to rotate it around, and so you don't have anything hitting there. I don't know if I've been lucky or been good, but I've never got one of these off and put the motor back together. I could about imagine it about shake itself apart, but that's just me thinking. Thank goodness I've never done that before. But alright, so we got that lined up. That's really about the hardest part of getting this back together. Now what we're going to do is put the transmission back in, as well as the oil screen here, and some RTV around this thing. Get ready to stick it back in. So or stick it back together. Let me grab the transmission and I'll get it ready to go in next. Alright guys, now we're ready to put the transmission back in this thing. I kind of took this thing apart, or the transmission out all as kind of a whole, so still got it all kind of together in a box. It's about the easiest thing to do because there's a lot of little pieces in here that you don't want to fall out and go all over the floor and all that, washers and all that. So the first two pieces we're going to put in, you know what I said about you don't want it to fall in the floor? Yeah, that just happened. So need to hang on to your washers here. Alright, so the first two pieces to put in are this smaller one here. Smaller shaft. It does have a washer on the end of it. This is the end that's going to go toward the back of the motor. Then this shaft here with all these gears, this is first, second, third, fourth, fifth. It's also got a washer on the top side that fell in the floor a minute ago. And the easiest thing to do with these is somewhat kind of mesh them together like this as you stick them in. And they go in these two. Small one goes in here and the big one goes in here. These two bearings on the back case, just slide them in there. And rotate them around. One thing you can kind of look at is the gears should be pretty flush here. That means they're both in there about the same amount, or in this case exactly the same amount. Get some over here to Jenga. Alright, so next part to go in will be the shift forks. The way they goes, they have a front, center, and rear. The rear goes naturally toward the back of the crankcase. The rear fork, kind of the way I look at these things is God, I'm dropping everything today. The way I look at these things is the pins on the back here all need to face the shift drum, so you can kind of see if you line the pins up. So that would mean that rear fork will go to this shaft, the other two forks will go to this shaft. So just kind of use that as a little bit of a guide as to where it goes. The rear fork goes in there right above the bottom gear that you can see. The center fork goes in there right above the second gear, I believe. Yes, right above the second gear on this shaft. And then the front fork goes right below the last gear, or the top gear on this shaft. And then you can put your shift drum in. This end with the slot in it goes in to the bottom. So you just slide that in there. And what you want to try to do here is get your shift forks to fit into the little grooves of the shift drum. So sometimes you have to lift up on them to get them to fit into a groove. they have their own dedicated grooves to fit into, so it's kind of only has one way to go. So there we go. Got all of those lined up. You can see there the rear one's a little bit off, so I'm gonna have to move it around right before I put the, or while I put the shaft through here. So you just wiggle that shaft in. There we go. Got two of them lined up. Then got the third one lined up. And then it has to go into the back case, and you just want to push it until it seats all the way up like that. Sometimes you have to tap that with a hammer to get it just wiggle down in the spot. And then the last thing is this reverse gear. It goes up on this last shaft here with the smaller gear going in first, and shaft goes in the hole. Just like that. That's how you put the transmission back together. Alright, next part we need to put in there and make sure we don't leave out is the oil screen here and the little plate. The oil screen is kind of shaped, got a little bit of a taper to it, as well as the plate. So just make sure the skinny side of it goes in first. Works best if you slide both of those in at the same time, just like that. And what I like to do is take some brake cleaner, go around and clean these mating surfaces up. Naturally, I've already cleaned these out real well, as you can see in the parts washer. So if you don't have a parts washer, you can do it with just brake cleaner. I try to get it real clean on the inside here, because sometimes these things get abused and have dirt and all kind of stuff floating around in there, and you don't want that circulating through your motor. So alright, so got that in, got both cases cleaned up. I'm going to smear a little RTV around here and get ready to stick these two cases back together. I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, got a light coat of RTV around this case. You need to make sure both of your dowels are in on the sides here. There's also one dowel up here on the top by the cylinder hole. Let me check one thing before I stick this thing back together. I'm thinking this thing is supposed to have an O-ring on it between these two cases. If all else fails, consult the manual. And it doesn't show an O-ring, so no, it doesn't have an O-ring on that one dowel. Alright, so stick these things back together. Pretty simple. You need to pick up on the timing chain guide there, otherwise it won't want to go back in there. So pick up on your chain guide, a piece of rag stuck in there, and then slide all this back together. Line your shafts up, kind of wiggle this thing around some. It's almost seated all the way up. I also want to pry back on this little arm here, because sometimes it'll get bound up on the shift drum. Alright, so there you go. That's seated all the way up. So now we're going to stick the bolts in there. This is the front case. It only has 2 bolts to hold this thing together. Got a little RTV on the end of the bolt, so clean that off. And then this long bolt goes on the center here. So tighten those down, and then flip it over and put all the other bolts in the back side. It's not ever a bad idea to when you get all the bolts put in the back side, come back and recheck those 2 front bolts, because sometimes they might not get tightened all the way up or be completely seated in when you tighten them up that first time. Alright, so now let me stick all these bolts around this outside edge, and don't forget the 2 bolts in the center here, and then we will start putting the back end together here. So I'll cut the camera back on when I get all this cleaned up and get all these bolts back in. Alright guys, I'm going to throw all this stuff back together here on the back. One thing I forgot to take out of the old crank is this little called a Woodruff key. Just knock it out with a screwdriver, because these new cranks don't come with one. There's nothing wrong with this old one, so we're just going to take it and tap it back down in here, if I can hold on to it. And this keeps your flywheel from spinning around on the crankshaft. Just like that. Alright, so now the next part to put in, I'm going to stick in the output shaft. This one runs from the front to the back. This one, when I pulled it out, it had the bearing still stuck on it, so we're not going to take that off. We'll just leave it on there and it'll line up when we push everything back together. Also, one little side note that I didn't mention is that when I put these things back together, you probably really don't have to, but I do go ahead and torque these bolts. It's not a real high torque rate setting, but I still like to do it, and that makes sure, like I did all these with the little impact, and then go back and this bolt here is a little bit loose, so it just makes sure you don't have those loose bolts once you get everything put back together. It's torques to like 10 Newton meters, like 8 or 9 foot-pounds, so that's what I got it torqued to. Okay, so like I said, put the output shaft on here. Next thing is this this gear here. I have it stuck together with a zip tie, because it does have a very small washer on it. That washer goes toward the outside, so just line it up over this shaft. You'd almost think that this thing has to just line up on one way, but you got to have it pretty close to get it right on there. There we go. It will fit multiple directions around there, and then your washer goes on there last. Next item to go in, let's go ahead and put in this reverse lever. This is the safety lever that actuates when you push the red button on the dash. It does have a washer on it, so make sure you hang on to that washer. Stick this thing in here. It goes in, this end goes in this hole here. The spring goes up over this little notch, so you kind of gotta twist it to get it in there. It works pretty good if you have a set of needle nose pliers, which I don't really have in arm's reach right now. So grab a set of needle nose, and the way this spring goes on here, it's got a hook on this end. It goes in this little notch on your arm like that, and so you can kind of halfway get it slid in there, and then pull up on this spring as you try to line it up in that hole. Not really the easiest thing to get in there. Got a lot of stuff working against you here. So that's pretty much it. Tap it till it seats all the way down, and it's kind of halfway kicked up here. What I like to do now is rotate this shift drum to try to make sure it goes into, or you have it into neutral. So I'm not sure what gear it's in now. You can spin the shaft here. I'm pretty sure that's in neutral. One way to tell absolutely for sure is to rotate this thing. This will be clockwise until it won't turn anymore, which is that right at that position, and then turn this shaft. This simulates pushing the red button down, and turn it one more time. There you go. That goes into reverse. So to kick this thing back into neutral, go until that arm kicks back. There you go. I like to turn it back just a little bit to your right to make sure it's tightened up in there. So that's neutral. That will help you get your shift sensor lined up when you go to put it back in, and you don't break that shift sensor, which I've seen it happen before. Alright, so next item to put on will be your flywheel, and this thing's pretty clean. Wipe the last little bit of crud out of it. And hey, while I got this thing took apart, I'm gonna go ahead and show you what we're trying to line up on these timing marks, because I can never seem to show this on the camera, and I might not be able to show it now. There's 2 tick marks. God, that thing's so shiny I can barely see it on the camera. There they are. So you see you got an F and then a T. So that little line under the F, that's when it fires, and then you spin it around just a little bit more and there's a line with a T. Most of these crankshafts will have like 2 tick marks down here somewhere, and as you're rotating it around you'll see those tick marks. You'll slow down, then you'll see a F mark and then the T mark, and that's where you hit top dead center. So that's what we're trying to line up through that timing hole. Once we get this back cover back together, I'll probably show you, but that's what we're shooting for, that T mark right there. Alright, I do like to clean this shaft off because it does have that keyway on there that keeps it from rotating, but it's also got a tapered shaft that the taper helps to hold the flywheel on too. So I'll clean that taper up good, and then stick this thing together. Line your keyway up in your hole there. I think that's it. There it is. It sets down. The gear almost touches the case here, and that's how you know you've got it almost all the way in there. And on this motor, you can go ahead and stick the crank bolt in there and this little notched washer thing. You can go ahead and tighten those up. That keeps your crank from, or your flywheel from snapping off there when you get ready to put the stator and all that on. I've had that happen before too. So tighten that up, and then the last thing to put on is going to be your starter gear here. Hopefully I got the camera still lined up. The starter gear here, it goes in just like that reverse gear did, with the big gear facing forward, and it slides over top of the flywheel here. It helps if you slide this shaft out. That's lined up, so slide that shaft back in the hole right there, and that should be everything to put the thing back together. I'm gonna I don't think I cleaned up that back case. Yeah, I got to run around this with some Scotch-Brite and clean out the inside. So let me do that real quick, and then we'll get ready to bolt the thing back on the back of the motor here. Alright, I'll cut the camera back on in a second. Alright guys, just about got everything ready to go back together on this back side here. Got everything cleaned up on the back cover. Like I mentioned, that O-ring on the middle cases, it doesn't have one there, but it does actually have this small O-ring that goes on this dowel pin right here above the flywheel. Make sure you stick that in there. It's an oil passage that runs all the way through this thing. And also, one thing I almost forgot is this shaft here that the shifter attaches to. You need to slide it in there too. It goes from the back here all the way to the front. Kind of put it in the center there. And now just need to smear a little bit of RTV on this back cover and slide it on. The very last thing you need to do is make sure that this shift sensor here is turned in the right direction. This model here has an N stamped in the case here, and this arm here, there's a long side to the arm. That long side needs to point toward that N, and that will let it line up with your shift drum that we messed with earlier to get make sure we got it in the neutral. The N stands for neutral there in this back cover case too. So let me cut the camera off. I'll cut it right back on once I get this silicone or RTV smeared on here and show you how to tap it back together. Alright guys, the biggest thing here is, like I said, get that shift sensor lined up to the end, and also you'll want to kind of have this shaft here with that the shifter attaches to halfway in the center to help you line this pin up. It needs to go in the center of that shaft. All this happens kind of fast, but it's got a the flywheel's magnetized here, so it kind of tries to suck itself on there. It's got to hold on to it pretty good to keep control of it. Work that seal over that output shaft, and there, see, it's already tried to pull itself down. Just want to make sure it goes on there square, and then like I said before, you want to make sure you get that arm lined up in that shaft. This one here might have to tap it down on there because it's kind of sticking on this bearing on that output shaft. See if I can tap it down. Alright, so our shifter's in there like it's supposed to go. And that's it. It's seated up. So now we'll stick all these bolts around the outside of this thing and flip the thing around to the front side and get the, actually I may stick the starter on here while I got it back here. But we'll flip the thing around to the front side and get ready to get the parts of the clutches back together. So I'll get these bolts tightened up and cut the camera back on when I jump to the front side. Alright guys, next order of business. I am going to replace the cam chain on this bike. It was a little stretched out, so got another one to go in it. It's going to be the next thing we're going to stick in is the cam. So grab the cam out of my plastic bag here. And I went ahead and lined up the top dead center mark in our timing hole here. Look for that T tick mark that I showed you earlier, and get it right there on the T. Well, the line is right below the T, and there's a little notch in the case, and that's what you try to line it up with. Alright, so you got to get that lined up, and then you will get the cam lined up as well. So put the new cam chain on the cam and slide it over the crankshaft. Slide in like this right here. Like I said before, it's pretty much at top dead center now. And the whole compression exhaust stroke doesn't matter at this point because you don't have the cam in there. So what you're trying to do is get the crankshaft in time with the cam. So let me check this again and make sure we're on that T mark. See, it went past it just a little bit. So we'll rotate it back just a hair right there. That's on the T mark. And then what you want to line up here is there's a notch. You can see it right there cast into the crank case. You want to line this hole and that line all up, or that bar all up with that same notch. So you see we're off just a little bit there. So rotate this thing around. It might be maybe a tooth off. So let me rotate it a tooth or so. That's pretty close there. It's still not seated all the way into that back bearing back there. So got it lined up pretty close there. So now we try to get this back side of it into that bearing, and sometimes it helps if you tap it with a hammer. There you go, that seats it up. As you can see, we've got the bar, the circle, and that notch. And check again to make sure we're dead on the timing mark, and we're dead on it. So that should be good. So your crank shaft is timed up with your cam. Therefore, your motor should be in time when you put it back together. So next thing we're going to do is put some Loctite on this retainer nut and tighten this thing down. I think maybe 25 Newton meters to hold the cam in there. Then we'll stick the tensioner on there to keep it from jumping time. If you happen to rotate it around, then we'll look at putting the oil pump on. So let me grab the tensioner, some Loctite, and we'll get the next couple items put on. Alright guys, next thing we're going to stick in is the tensioner. The way you work this thing to get the tension off of it is push down this little arm here, or this little wedge shaped piece with your fingernail, and press press the plunger in. Try not to drop it like I just about did. And then you can take a small piece of wire, shove it in this little hole right here, and it will hold the tensioner closed like that. Then you can stick the bolts in it. Like that there. The other bolt here. Tighten both of those up. And then pull your wire out, and it will snap back and put tension back on your cam chain. Just like that. Alright, that's simple enough. Next thing we're going to do is stick the oil pump on. I like replacing these. Usually replace the gears in these oil pumps. In this case, you can replace, or the pump comes as a whole assembly. So I'm going to stick that on there. I'm thinking there is something else I need. No, there's not a guide in this case. So you stick the oil pump in here. You just have to line it up with the end of that shaft there. Sometimes it takes a couple times to get it rotated around, and sometimes it don't, just like that. Out of the old oil pump, you do want to make sure you replace, or you put these sleeves and O-rings back in there. These here, little dowel things. So pull that out, slide it back in, pull this one out, slide it back in, and there you go. Then you can just trash this one because it isn't any good at this point, and stick the 3 bolts back in it, in our trusty cardboard bolt organizer, and the oil pump will be installed. Alright, and the next thing we'll do is start putting some of the clutch stuff back together. So let me get these 3 bolts tightened up, and I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, now we're going to start on the gear change stuff here. First thing we need to do is stick the washer. Got one thin washer on this shaft here. Second thing is to put this little star looking part on here. Got a hole in it that lines up with that pin there. You can kind of slide it over there. You're going to need your just a screwdriver work to pry back on this arm while you get that star shaped piece in position. Sorry about that. Alright, so pull that back like that. Stick this in that hole. And there it goes. It holds it right there. Let me cut the camera back on in a second. I got somebody pulling up. Alright guys, next thing we need to do is put this little, I call it a golf divot tool, because that's kind of what it looks like. Snap that thing in there, put the little forked part over the shift shaft, and then you can put the washer and the nut on there. Make sure you put Loctite on that nut, because I've actually had these back out before. There's a little tab in the washer that lines up with the notch in that star piece. So run that down and hit it with the torque wrench. Alright, and then the last piece to go on before we can start pushing the clutches on is this thing here. It goes over the shaft, goes over this spring. The spring goes over this little other shaft that's stuck out here, and then goes inside that clutch divot tool thing. One thing you want to check here is move that little, whatever you call the thing, divot tool or whatever, around to make sure that this piece here seats all the way up. It's got a little bit of a weld on the back side of it, and I've had them before get in there and it not go all the way down, and the cover didn't fit on there quite right. So then snap your little spring back over your hole, and that's done. The only other remaining item is this piece here, and it slides over here like this, It's got a notch that it has to fit into, but you can see you can't put the clutch on with this on here, so you just leave that kicked off, and then you can go ahead and install your change clutch and your crankshaft gear, and get the rest of this on the front end. So let me get those parts up on the bench here, and we'll get them back installed. Alright guys, now we're going to start with the clutches on this thing. First thing you need to put on is this gear here. Goes on the crankshaft. It's got a washer on the back side, so make sure you include that in there. Just slides right over here. Kind of rotate it around a little bit to get it go on. Next thing you need to put on will be your change clutches, and they just slip right on. Thing with them, make sure you got this bushing in the back side here. Slides over here. You kind of got to get the splines lined up on that shaft, as well as the splines or the gear lined up on that last little crank gear you just put in there. So just wiggle this thing around there. It's not sliding out on there. Get it in the gear. There it is. Alright, it's got a washer and a nut. I believe that's a 27 millimeter. Got one laying here. Yes, 27 millimeter. I'll grab my airline. I'll go ahead and run that one on. Tighten it down good and tight. That nut does have a has a spot to be staked in it. So take you a little punch. Just had one up here naturally. No, I don't see it. Go to my punch drawer. Alright, so take you a little punch and hit that little dented spot on the shaft. Try to keep that nut from coming off of there. Just like that. Alright, now your other clutch, your centrifugal clutch, will be the next one to go on. It's pretty much the same setup, except it doesn't have a bushing on the back side, just a bell, clutch weights, slide right over the crankshaft. Same deal, you got to get the splines lined up on that gear and the splines lined up on the shaft. It too has a washer and a nut. Thing's a little bit heavy, it's got the motor tilted forward. Alright, so tighten it down, same deal. Got a stake spot in it too. So knock that out. And that's pretty much it on this front end. Now we can get that front cover cleaned up and ready to go back in. I may run through just a few things that you need to make sure you got in here. One thing, this shaft is spun around here, so get it up into position where it needs to go. It has a notched spot in that shift shaft, so you got to get it lined up in there, and then it slides all the way down into that spring there. So it goes into position about like that, just right off of the clutch cover. Alright, make sure both of your dowels and O-rings are in here on your oil pump. You got a dowel and an O-ring here, and then there's more dowels, one here at the top and one here at the bottom. I'm hoping that one's still in the front cover. Yes, it is. Got the front cover here. I'm gonna go ahead and go ahead with it and clean all the crud out of it. Clean up this gasket material with Scotch-Brite, and I guess I need to go ahead and put the rest of the gear change stuff in there too. Show you how to do that while I still got it on the camera. So everything goes in this change clutch here. It will be this little bearing and retainer. It just slips right in the center of your clutch. It's a little tight tolerance, so tap it in with a hammer. And then the last thing is this little arm here. And this part here sits on this little arm here. So you just slip it in there just like that. Give you a side shot of it. That's what it looks like from the side. And then on these models, the thing with the 3 balls on it, the triangle shaped piece, it stays in that front cover there. So you don't have to worry about it on these. Alright, let me get that cover cleaned up, and I'll cut the camera back on. It's pretty uneventful, but right before I tap it back on. So, cut the camera on in a sec. Alright guys, got a thin layer of RTV smeared around this front cover here. It doesn't have a gasket in this case, the RTV's it. So like I went through before, just want to make sure all your dowels are in there, especially your dowels in your oil pump, your O-rings, dowel here with the O-ring, your O-ring there for your water outlet. And I didn't unbolt this water pump cover, so when you go to stick this thing back together, you need to make sure your little fork here is halfway lined up with your center bolt on your, or center rod there on the end of the crank, end of the cam, not the end of the crank. So I just kind of halfway guess with that. They'll usually get pretty close. We've got a little bit of cleaning residue left inside of this cover. Alright, so now we just slide this thing on, kind of get the that output shaft lined up like that right there. Move that shaft back just a little bit. That should be pretty close to lining up there. Sometimes you do have to tap these things with the hammer to get them to seat all the way up. In this case here, it feels like the seal is getting hung on the shaft here. Yeah, trying to be real careful here. The seal's trying to roll out on me here on the output shaft. Don't want to mess that one up, because that's actually one I'm not going to be replacing. So, see if I can get it to slide. There it went. Alright, had just one little lip on there that was getting caught. Alright, so now the rest of this stuff should just knock right together. Sometimes it takes a little persuasion, because there's the crankshaft has to go into a bearing here, and it has to be pretty much perfectly lined up before it will go. The seal's still kicked out just a little bit on me there. What you can do in those cases is rotate this output shaft, and it'll make the seal flop right back in there just like that. Alright, so now I just have to put all these bolts in. I'm going to go ahead and stick another oil filter in this thing, so I'll have it ready to go when I get the top end back together. And I'm probably going to set this off the bench because I'm still waiting on the piston to come in. But I'm going to go ahead and do the valve seals and lap the valves in it. I will cut the camera back on for that. So let me get all these bolts in here and then we'll jump onto the cylinder head. Alright guys, I'll show you how to do the valves on these things. I can't remember if I did an earlier video of removing these valves. If not, I'll show you how I put them back together, and that might be enough information for y'all to take them apart if you have the means to. A lot of people aren't going to have these valve spring compressors, but you can always rent them from the parts place, but I don't know if people will go that far when they're rebuilding one of these. So anyway, what I usually do is take a little wire brush on my die grinder and clean these things up. These valves here look pretty clean, so don't really think I'm gonna have to mess with them much. What we're gonna do is lap the valve here. I've got some valve grinding compound, some like gritty gel like stuff. I don't really know exactly what it is, but works pretty dang good. So you put a little bit on the edge of your valve there, stick it in the hole. What some people do is take a drill and catch it on the shaft of this thing and let the drill spin and work it in and out. I've never really done it that way. I've always had these little suction cup tool things, and they work pretty good if you stick them onto the valve there. And well, this one's got a little bit of grease on it, so you clean that off because it won't stick if you got something on the valve. I guess that's one of the disadvantages of using the suction cups, is that the valve has to be pretty clean. So you just stick that on there, work this thing back and forth like you're about to start a fire. You can pull in and out on it, and that gets some of the valve grinding compound into the crack and onto the seating surface. I don't think there's any exact science to this. I just do it a few times and clean this stuff off. And when you finish, you can really tell what you've done. You can see that real bright gray area around there. That's where the seating surface is cleaned up. Same thing with the cylinder head. And what you want to look for here is make sure that you've got a consistent surface all the way around, and that your valve's not bent somewhere. And then you can see there kind of on the head where it's shining. So you got a good valve seat there. So now what you want to do is put the valve seal in. I already popped one of these out earlier, so there's your part number if you need it. Figure if you this deep into it, you probably already figured out how to get the part numbers on the thing. So these valve seals are they have a metal cover around the outside of them, and the manual talks about pressing them on and all this stuff. You can just press them up, push it on with your hand. That one slid right on there. It did have just a drop of oil on it, which may have helped some. So now stick the valve in there, put your spring in, the washer that goes on top, and then the valve spring compressor I use looks like a huge C-clamp. It's the big old thing here. It's actually for an automotive application, but it works very good for these. So you get that thing lined up in there like that, press down on it, and it pops the valve out. You're actually supposed to have this adjusted where you can bottom it out and it will lock the valve in. I don't have to do all that. I'll stick these two retainers in there while I press it down, and then let the pressure off on it. We'll be done with this intake one. Alright, so here, these are the little retainers. They've got a little taper in them. The one side's fatter or thicker than the other side. The skinny side goes in first. These things kind of act like a wedge to hold this thing together. The pressure from the spring actually holds the cap on to the end of the valve. Push them down until they get in their groove, and then let your pressure up, and there you go. I always like to, and I think I read this somewhere, I like to tap these with a hammer a couple times just to make sure that it's seated in the groove and everything's in there right, so you don't have anything moving around once you crank it up. Alright, so let me do the exhaust valve, and I'm not going to video that because it's pretty much the same thing as the intake valve. And I'm going to pick that cylinder head up, or not the cylinder head, the actual cylinder up today. I'm getting it machined out, so I should be putting this thing back together probably this weekend. So I'll pick up the videos probably tomorrow. Alright guys, back on this 500. Just got the cylinder back, getting it bored out. I'm gonna go ahead and put this top end back together on it, or put some of it back together tonight. I may have to finish it up tomorrow night. But start off with, gonna put the piston on. Got a brand new wrist pin, brand new piston for that matter. This one's gonna be bored over 50 over. You see the 50 stamped in it there. The way this thing goes in there, it's got an N stamped in it. That's on the intake side, which is at the rear of the motor. What I like to do is put one of the little clips in there first. In this case, on the intake side, that's just because that's the way I'm working, and I'll tap the pin through that way. If you go ahead and put one of them in there now, it's a little easier than putting it on while it's on the motor. I did put a little oil on the wrist pin, so you just slide this wrist pin through the rod here. Get it everything lined up, and it should slide right through there. Can't hardly get the wrist pin to slide out of the piston. Just like that. I like to take a screwdriver and push on it so it gets in there to where you can't catch it with your hand. Press it all the way in. It sits in there probably about 1/4 of an inch deep or so, and then you want to put your last clip on there. Shove your rag down in here. I say this on all these, but maybe if everybody watches all my videos, they'll eventually catch my drift. But if you don't put a rag in there, this clip will fly out and it will go into the crankcase about 10 times out of 10. So we'll make sure you put a rag in there, and you just push your clip in like that. Got that one lined up. Alright, pull your rag back out. Now go ahead and stick the base gasket on here. It's this one here. Clean it up just a little bit. I reuse these things. They're a metal gasket. They don't require any kind of RTV or anything like that on them. Never really had a problem with them sealing up. You don't want to put any, like I said before, any kind of sealant on it, because just not supposed to do that on metal gaskets. So slide it on down on there. I got both of the dowel pins are on these rear studs. Both of those are in there. So now time to put the rings on. Hope we got the right rings here, because I ordered the wrong piston initially. Alright, so here's the rings we got. You've got 5 here. First one I like to put on is this funny looking waffle looking ring. This is what they call an oil scraper. And the way I usually orient these things, I don't know if there's a wrong and right way. I just know that I guess the one wrong way is you don't want any of the cracks to line up, the gaps to line up. So what I usually do with mine is put the oil scraper over here at, say this is 12 o'clock, I put the oil scraper at the 6 o'clock position. Next ring to go in is this little small ring here. It goes either on top or below the oil scraper. Doesn't really matter where you put it. So I put the gap for it right here, and like I said, if that's 12 at about say 10 o'clock position, put the gap for the next little thin ring. Just so happens that the one I just put on there went on top of the oil scraper, so this one will go below the oil scraper. Biggest thing on these is you just want to make sure you don't really stretch them out no farther than you have to, because I've had people break them before. Alright, so the last 2 rings are the middle ring and the top ring. The middle ring, at least from the Honda ones, is always a darker color. It has a RN stamped on it, and this one's got a 50 on it, for which is 50 over half millimeter. And this one's got an R. The top ring has an R with a 50 as well. So the middle ring, goes in next, and I like to orient it back at the 6 o'clock position. I know I didn't want to say these cracks to line up, but I really don't think that makes much of a difference on the oil scraper. You just don't want any of the other ones to line up. And then the top ring goes in at the 12 o'clock position. Both of those rings go with the letters, numbers facing up, and fit in there just like that. And so the next thing you want to put on is your cylinder. I had this thing bored. I did clean it up, soap and water first, and then I put some automatic transmission fluid in it. My engine guy says that has detergents and cleaners and stuff in it, and it actually works real good to clean up any of that boring residue that may be left in there. If you don't want to leave any kind of gritty stuff in there, it will just run up and down with the piston and grind your piston back, or grind your cylinder back out. Don't want to do that. So the best way to do these is take a small screwdriver, kind of get the thing, you lay the cylinder on there, it actually is kind of going in there at a little bit of an angle, so that the back side has the ring compressed and the front side doesn't. So you just push in. Your main areas on these are where the gaps are. You don't want it to let the ring slip over right there at those gaps. And just keep pressing it down and pushing down a little bit on it as you go. Caught my glove in there. Push in on the ring. You just don't want to force this, because if you let your ring slip out and get caught sideways in there, it will mess your cylinder up, mess your piston up. That's the last thing you need doing this stuff. Kind of helps a little if you kind of wiggle it a little bit. Alright guys, I almost forgot. Before you put this cylinder down on here, you need to put these followers in there to go over that right on the cam lobes, and then slide your cylinder on down. Sorry about that. These cylinders here don't have much of a taper on them. Some of them have more of a taper that you can kind of makes the cylinder, or makes the rings kind of slide up in there. But these don't have that, so you just have to keep working with them to get them to go down. So we're all the way down. It appears we're just barely not. I think my piston's a little bit sideways. And now it's trying to go down into the crankcase. Pull it back out. Kind of hold up on the piston with your hand as you tap this cylinder to get it to go down. And there you go. Slides right down there like that. It don't take much pressure at all to get this thing to slide down. My dang crankshaft rotated around there though, but anyway, you'll have that sometimes. So take a hammer, get this thing seated all the way down. It's not going over the dowel pins real good. There it is. There, now it's over the dowels. And I'm going to attempt to run that crank back up if I can. There you go. Pretty close to top dead center, so we'll get it adjusted back right once we get ready to put the rocker arms back on. All right, so you got a two 10mm bolts here on your crankcase, and next part to go in will be your head gasket. Just like the base gasket, I usually reuse these. I'll clean it up, put some copper seal on it, and put it back on. And I'm gonna go ahead and get this thing cleaned up, spray some copper seal. I'll cut the camera back on once I get that done. There ain't no sense in y'all watching me do that, so I'll cut it back on in just a sec. Alright guys, got some copper seal on my gasket now. Also kind of tap these dowels in there. They got two dowels now that are diagonal from one another, and make sure I get my gasket down on there the right way, just like that. And then the next thing to go on will be the head. I've already done the valve seals on this one. I think I had it in an earlier video, or at least I hope I did, or earlier part of this video, let me say that. So they're ready to go. Just clean up this mating surface a little bit here and slide it down on there. There again, them the dowels are kind of holding it from going all the way down on there. Just tap it down on with the hammer. Alright. Now the next thing you want to do is put your bolts on to bolt all this head down. And the torque spec for this thing is, I believe it's 39 Newton meters. Let me check that real quick. Or 29 foot-pounds. Yes sir, 39 Newton meters or 29 foot-pounds. I like to try to do those in steps. So what you do is you take, say for instance, the first torque shooting for, say, 29 foot-pounds. Go maybe 10 foot-pounds, tighten it down. Then do 20 foot-pounds, tighten it down. And then the final torque of 29. That just makes sure everything get pressed down evenly all the way around, and helps with your head gasket seating up. These are 14 millimeters. Let me see if I can grab a socket real quick. And a torque wrench. Alright, so go 10 foot-pound first. Do it at a diagonal. I just put the acorn bolts and the other 14 millimeter bolts on there, whatever you want to call them things. There's also a 12 millimeter, I'm sorry, those are 14 millimeter nuts. There's also a 12 millimeter bolt that goes in the center here between the two push rods, and it doesn't have a torque spec on it. It just says to torque it, or to tighten it down. So once I get these big bolts tightened down, the torque, I'll go ahead and tighten that one down, just hand tight as I can get it. So I think y'all kind of get the gist on this. So that was 10 foot-pounds, 20 foot-pounds, and then the final torque, 29 foot-pounds. Right there. Again, going at a crisscross pattern. Alright, put your 12 millimeter bolt in the center there, tighten it down good and tight. Probably go ahead and slide this coolant hose on here too, because it seems like sometimes I forget to do that. Put that on there, tighten that clamp up along with that 12 millimeter. Then we will be ready to put the rocker arm holders on. We'll do that next. I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, now the next thing you want to do is put your two dowels in here on the top of the head and your gasket. Just clean this gasket up. It's a metal gasket again, so you don't have to put any RTV or anything like that on it. And then put your push rods in. You just slide right in there. It actually got little dents in the gasket there to hold them up, just like that. And then the next thing that goes on is your rocker arms. What I like to do on these is stick my finger in the valve cover holes and hold up on them. That kind of keeps these out, so they'll might run a better chance of them hitting the push rods. So just line that up over there, get your dowels lined up, hold up on your push rods, I mean on your rocker arms, and knock it down on there. Alright, then next thing you need to do is put your bolts in. And we're getting in the real short rows here on this one. Let me get these bolts tightened down, and then I will show you how to adjust the valves on it. I've got a few other videos on here showing how to do that, but since this is going to be a rebuild video, I'll show you how to do the complete rebuild. So I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, now I got the valve covers on, or the rocker arms on, and turned the crankshaft. It was already actually pretty close to being at top dead center, so I turned it around until the T marks in here lined up with the little groove there, the T with the line under it. And now we're ready to adjust the valves. It should be at top dead center. Usually to check this, you can feel clearance in both of your valves. Sorry, I had the camera turned up. Feel clearance in both your valves. Alright, so we're going to start off. This is the exhaust valve, and it's the fatter of the two. The exhaust valve calls for 0.23 millimeters. That's 0.009 inches. And the intake calls for 0.15 millimeters, or 0.006, which is what most of the Hondas are. Not real sure why this one calls for two different ones, but it does. So like I said, you're going to go a little thicker on your exhaust valve here, and it's not far from being in clearance. So what I like to do is you break this adjuster nut loose like that, 10 millimeter. Take a flat screwdriver and just turn that thing clockwise until you get some resistance on your feeler gauge. You don't want it to where it's going to buckle the feeler gauge when you pull it out, but I like to set these a little tighter, a little on the tight side, just because usually when you crank these things up, they loosen up a little bit. So that's got a pretty good bit of resistance in it there, so that should be good. Jump over here to the intake side. It's a little loose, so break the adjuster or the lock nut loose, turn the screw in, and I like to hold the adjuster screw while you tighten it up, just to make sure you don't get it doesn't twist around on you or anything. Yeah, that one's good and tight too. So alright, that's done. So our valve adjustment's done. Put your inspection hole cover back on. Also going to bolt on the pull start cover. 3 bolts back here on the back with the O-ring and the valve covers. And the only other thing I got left in the box over here is the shifter, which I'll probably wait till I put it back on the bike before I put the shifter on. So that's pretty much the reassembly on this thing. I will cut the camera back on. Hopefully it's going to be tonight I get this thing thrown back on the bike and get it to crank up, because it seems like a lot of people want to see the first startup videos on these things. So I'll cut that back on hopefully in a little bit and show you that. Alright guys, got this motor put back on. We're going to see if we can get this thing to crank up. This is going to be the first startup, so if it don't start, I might have to do something else. Alright, so it's showing it's in first gear. Now we're in neutral. Power steering light on. Don't know what's that about, but alright, let's see if it'll fire up. The starter sounds a little rough on it. Cycle the key a couple times on it to see if the fuel pump will get it primed up. A little something going on with the display. Thing's kind of loud, so let me roll the door up and try it again. Alright guys, back on this 500 Rubicon. This saw from the previous video, couldn't get the thing to crank. Well, in all honesty, it wasn't running when I got it over here, so I don't really know why I thought it was just going to fire right up when I put the motor in. But digging around a little bit, found out that the fuel pump wasn't working, and the owner put a new fuel pump in it just a few months ago, so I wasn't thinking it was a pump. I did check the pump, which if you do want to do that, your prong's on your right side here. The very top right prong is the positive for the pump, and the bottom prong is the negative. If you hook a battery up to it, you can hear the pump come on. So did that, pump came on. So this thing don't have the best wiring in the world. This fuse box has gotten hot on it. It's pretty rough on the wiring outfit. So I got to looking around for the fuel pump relay. Initially thought this was it, but because it looks identical to the fuel pump relays that come on the 420 older model 420s, but that's not. This controls the front differential. So it's in the relay block here. It's covered up by this little thing with a little snorkel or whatever that is on it. Alright, so your relay for your fuel pump is this black one here, and I pulled it out. Didn't really look odd, so it had a little bit of a rust color on the prongs. The prongs were still there, so it must be something internal. I ended up, so this is the black one and this is the black one, as you can see. I just swapped the two. I don't know what this even controls, but it doesn't control the fuel pump, so I swapped the two, and with the key switch on, fuel pump immediately come on. So that tells me that the relay's bad. So I got one of those on order. They're like $9. So now there you go. Fires right up. Motor seems to run real good. I'm gonna go ahead and put this stuff back together, and like I say, I got one of these on order, so when it comes in, I'll swap it out. Might just swap it out with this one because I don't even know what that controls. But thank you guys for checking out my video. Got a few other things I got to do to this thing with just some small stuff, and so y'all hit the like button, subscribe, and be looking for some more videos. I might do another one today on the little fuel pump I'll be replacing on a Grizzly 550. Alright, have a good day.